The distress call came in at 4:47 a.m., Channel 16, the International Maritime Distress Frequency, monitored by every vessel with functioning radio equipment in every body of water on the planet, carried a transmission in Farsi first, then broken English. A vessel in difficulty. Engine failure. Position given as 11 nautical miles northwest of Qeshm Island, directly in the center of the Hormuz Strait's inbound shipping lane. Crew requesting assistance. The transmission was repeated twice, then went silent. In the Combat Information Center, the watch officer cross-referenced the position against the radar picture. There was a contact at that location, a dhow-type vessel, small radar cross-section, consistent with the hundreds of commercial dhows that move cargo and passengers through the strait on any given day. It was stationary. It had been stationary for 6 minutes, which was when the radar had first resolved it clearly enough to assign a track. The watch officer logged the contact and called the captain at 4:49 a.m. The distress call was real in the sense that a vessel was genuinely stationary in the inbound shipping lane of the Hormuz Strait at 4:47 a.m. Everything else about it was a question. The Strait of Hormuz at 4:47 a.m. was not dark in any meaningful sense. The Gulf summer produced a specific pre-dawn luminosity, a thin gray light that arrived before the sun and turned the water the color of old pewter. Visibility was 4 miles. The destroyer had been conducting a standard transit watch for 8 hours, maintaining presence in the Strait's shipping lanes during the overnight window when IRGCN fast boat activity historically peaked. Nothing unusual had appeared on the radar until the dhow contact materialized at 4:41 a.m. and stopped moving 6 minutes later. Stop. In the inbound lane. In the dark. The captain reached the bridge at 4:51 a.m. and studied the radar picture for 90 seconds before giving any order. In those 90 seconds, he was running the same calculation that every surface warfare officer who had operated in the Hormuz Strait for the past decade had been trained to run, the distress call probability matrix. Genuine distress in the Hormuz Strait was not rare. The waters carried enormous commercial traffic, including aging dhows, whose engines were maintained on optimistic schedules and whose crew's mechanical competence varied widely. Engine failures happened. Vessels went stationary in shipping lanes because engines failed, not because someone planned it. The IRGCN's use of distress signals as tactical tools had a history that stretched back to at least 2019, when a British-flagged tanker was seized in the strait under the cover of a reported navigational incident. The pattern had been documented, analyzed, and briefed to every commanding officer assigned to Fifth Fleet operations. The briefing included specific behavioral indicators that distinguished genuine distress from staged scenarios, thermal imaging signatures of engine space heat, AIS track anomalies in the period before distress broadcast, timing, correlations between distress calls and fast boat deployment from nearby IRGCN facilities. Qeshm Island was the primary IRGCN fast boat operating base in the Eastern Strait. Its harbor could shelter and deploy dozens of fast attack craft. Its position on the Iranian side of the outbound shipping lane gave it direct access to both shipping lanes with minimal transit time to intercept geometry. IRGCN commanders at Qeshm operated with a kind of local knowledge that came from years of daily observation. They knew the tidal patterns, the radar coverage gaps caused by the strait's geography, the timing windows when commercial traffic density made evasive maneuvering by a warship most complicated. The dhow had been placed at a position that accounted for all of those factors. 11 nautical miles northwest of Qeshm, in the inbound lane center, at a time when pre-dawn visibility reduced the bridge crew's visual options, and the commercial traffic ahead and behind the destroyer created natural corridor walls. The staging was professional. It had been done before, refined from previous operations, and it was being executed now with the institutional knowledge of an organization that had been practicing this specific scenario for years. That professionalism was precisely what made it identifiable. An improvised staging operation leaves gaps. A rehearsed one has a specific geometry, a specific timing, a specific pattern of behavior that analysts who had studied the previous operations could recognize in its opening moves. The 4 contacts appearing simultaneously at 04:52 a.m. was the tell. Genuine distress response from nearby fishing or commercial vessels would produce staggered arrivals. Different vessels making independent decisions at different rates. Simultaneous emergence from the same island shadow at identical speeds on pre-planned headings was not independent decision-making. It was a coordinated launch triggered by a single order. The captain had noted the simultaneity before the second radar sweep completed. He had said nothing about it. The observation was already incorporated into the decision that was already being made. The IRGCN also had a documented history of staging exactly this scenario. A vessel, sometimes a dhow, sometimes a repurposed fishing boat, sometimes a purpose-built decoy, positioned in a shipping lane, broadcasting a distress call designed to compel any nearby warship to approach and investigate. Maritime law required the response. The 1974 Solace Convention and customary international law both obligated vessels capable of rendering assistance to do so. A warship that ignored a genuine distress call and a vessel subsequently sank with loss of life would face consequences that far outweighed the tactical inconvenience of responding to a staged one. The IRGCN understood this obligation perfectly. They had used it. The dhow sat in the inbound lane at 4:51 a.m., 11 nautical miles from Qeshm Island. Stationary. Distress call transmitted and then silent. At 4:52 a.m., 4 new contacts appeared on the radar. They emerged from the shadow of Qeshm Island simultaneously, not sequentially, not with any gap that would suggest independent departure, simultaneously, as if a single command had launched all 4 at the same moment. Fast attack craft, based on the speed profiles, 35 knots, accelerating. Their headings were not random. 2 were on courses that would place them between the destroyer and the dhow contact. 2 were on courses that flanked the destroyer's current position from port and starboard. 4 contacts, 2 blocking the approach lane, 2 flanking. The math of the staging operation was now visible in its entirety. The dhow was not disabled. The dhow was an anchor, a fixed point around which the response geometry was constructed. Any vessel approaching the distress call would find itself in a corridor between the dhow ahead and the 4 fast attack craft closing from behind and both sides. Close enough to the dhow that turning back required maneuvering through the fast attack craft's closing geometry. Far enough from its starting position that the strait's commercial traffic complicated any aggressive course change. It was a trap designed with maritime law as its trigger mechanism. Solace required approach. Approach triggered the encirclement. The encirclement created footage, leverage, or worse. CPA to the lead blocking pair, 4,100 yards, closing at 35 knots. Time to CPA at current rate, 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The captain had seen the staging assessment in the pre-deployment intelligence package. He had read the incident reports from 3 previous IRGCN dhow operations in the Strait going back 5 years. He had run the simulation of this specific scenario in the 5th Fleet training environment 6 months earlier. None of that made 4:52 a.m. easier. What it made possible was a response that did not require the next 4 minutes to be improvised. The Seahawk launched at 4:53 a.m. The pre-dawn light was enough for the FLIR system to work effectively. Infrared signatures against the cooler water background, clear and unambiguous. The helicopter climbed to 800 feet and headed directly for the dhow contact, covering the 11 nautical miles at maximum transit speed. At 800 feet, the FLIR could resolve details at that range that were invisible from the destroyer's bridge. Engine temperature, deck activity, hull configuration. The CIC team was already working the 4 fast attack contacts with everything available. The electronic warfare suite was monitoring their emissions, navigational radar, communications, any fire control signatures. Clean so far, standard navigational radar, no targeting system emissions. The fast attack craft were not preparing a weapons solution. They were positioning. CPA to the lead blocking pair, 3,200 yards. Time to CPA, 2 minutes, 40 seconds. CPA to the port flanker, 3,800 yards. CPA to the starboard flanker, 4,100 yards. The destroyer altered course at 4:55 a.m., not toward the dhow, not deeper into the trap. Perpendicular to the approach lane, angling northeast, a course change that served 2 simultaneous purposes. First, it opened the geometry with the port and starboard flankers, whose intercept calculations had been built around the destroyer's original course along the shipping lane. A perpendicular turn disrupted those calculations, requiring the flankers to adjust their own courses. A recalculation that took time, coordination, and revealed the extent to which their approach was planned rather than responsive. Second, the perpendicular course change maintained the destroyer's distance from the dhow, while the Seahawk conducted its assessment from altitude. The maritime law obligation to render assistance did not require a warship to maneuver into an encirclement to do so. It required the nearest capable vessel to render assistance. The Seahawk was a capable asset. It was proceeding to the dhow's location. The obligation was being met without the trap being entered. That legal distinction mattered. It would matter in the diplomatic cable. It would matter in any post-incident review. The destroyer had not ignored the distress call. It had responded to it with the appropriate asset while maintaining its own tactical position. At 4:57 a.m., the Seahawk reached the dhow's position and descended to 200 feet. The FLIR picture was immediately clarifying. The dhow's engine space, visible as a thermal signature through the vessel's thin hull plating, was hot, not residually warm from a recently failed engine. Hot, as in currently running at or near operating temperature. A vessel whose engine had failed 6 minutes earlier would show a cooling thermal signature, not a sustained high-temperature one. The engine was running. The dhow was not disabled. The Seahawk pilot held position at 200 feet over the dhow, searchlight activating and illuminating the vessel's deck. The deck showed 4 individuals, crew members, or at least people performing that role, who reacted to the searchlight with the specific body language of people who had not expected their vessel to be examined this closely, this quickly. One moved toward the wheelhouse. One moved toward the stern. 2 did not move at all. The distress call had been transmitted from a functioning vessel with a running engine, crewed by people who appeared significantly less distressed than the Channel 16 broadcast had suggested. At 4:58 a.m., the Seahawk's laser marker activated and painted the dhow's wheelhouse with a focused point of coherent light. Not a threat in the kinetic sense, a demonstration of precision. The helicopter knew exactly where the vessel's control center was, could document everything that happened there, and was close enough that nothing aboard the dhow existed outside its observation. The 4 fast attack contacts had continued their approach throughout the Seahawk's assessment. The course change at 4:55 a.m. had disrupted the flankers' geometry, but had not stopped their closing. They were now at CPA to lead blocking pair, 1,900 yards. CPA to port flanker, 2,400 yards. Rate slowing. CPA to starboard flanker, 2,700 yards. Rate slowing. The flankers had slowed. Not dramatically. Still moving at 22 knots. Still on generally intercept headings. But the rate of closure had reduced from the 35 knots of their initial approach. They were recalculating. The destroyer was not where their approach geometry had expected it to be. The Seahawk was over the dhow rather than the destroyer maneuvering toward it. The trap had not produced the expected target geometry. The LRAD activated at 4:59 a.m., directed at the lead blocking pair. At 1,900 yards in pre-dawn conditions on a flat Gulf surface, the LRAD's directed acoustic output was effective across the gap. The lead blocking pair were small vessels, fast attack craft displaced perhaps 12 tons each, and their crews occupied open or lightly sheltered positions that offered no acoustic protection from a directed system at this range. The signal was not designed to cause injury. It was designed to be impossible to ignore, which at 1,900 yards it was. The lead blocking pair altered course at 5 a.m. Not a full reversal, a divergence of approximately 20 degrees each, opening the corridor between them from 400 yards to 900 yards as they spread apart in response to the acoustic pressure. The corridor that had been designed to be impassable was now navigable at speed with acceptable margins on both sides. At 5:01 a.m., the dhow's engine noise became audible to the Seahawk crew through their open audio monitoring. The vessel was accelerating. Under searchlight and laser marker, with the destroyer's course change, having disrupted the encirclement geometry and the lead blocking pair having spread under the LRAD. The dhow's crew had apparently decided that whatever purpose the stationary position served, it was no longer being served. The vessel began moving, not toward the destroyer, not on any threatening heading, but northeast, accelerating to 12 knots, a course that would take it toward the Omani coast and out of the inbound shipping lane. The distress was over. The engine had recovered. Channel 16 carried no update, no correction, no explanation for the recovery. The vessel that had been disabled at 4:47 a.m. was making 12 knots at 5:01 a.m. and putting distance between itself and the Seahawk as quickly as its hull would allow. At 5:03 a.m., the 4 fast attack contacts began their withdrawal. Not simultaneously. The lead blocking pair first, then the starboard flanker, then the port flanker 4 minutes later, as if each vessel was receiving its own withdrawal order through a channel the destroyer's electronic warfare suite could not fully monitor. They returned toward Qeshm Island at speeds between 15 and 20 knots, fast enough to show purpose, slow enough not to appear to be fleeing. The Seahawk maintained altitude coverage until all 4 contacts were within 3 nautical miles of Qeshm Island, then climbed to 1,000 feet and shifted to wide area surveillance mode. The electronic warfare team continued monitoring for any additional contacts that might represent a second wave deployment. Nothing appeared. The strait settled back into its pre-dawn routine. The shipping lane contacts moving steadily in their assigned directions. The radar picture returning to the ordinary complexity of one of the world's busiest waterways. The watch officer logged the conclusion at 5:07 a.m. Distress contact assessed as non-genuine based on thermal imaging from helicopter asset confirming operational engine during distress broadcast period. 4. IRGCN fast attack contacts disengaged following LRAD activation and course adjustment. No weapons released. No physical contact. Distress vessel departed to the northeast at approximately 12 knots following helicopter illumination. On the bridge, the helmsman had held the perpendicular course through the entire engagement window. From 4:55 a.m. to 5:04 a.m., 9 minutes on a heading that had not been the shipping lane and had not been the trap. The course that was neither the expected response nor the panicked reaction. The third course, the one that fulfilled the legal obligation through the helicopter while maintaining the tactical position that prevented the encirclement from closing. The perpendicular course change at 4:55 a.m. was the kind of decision that looked obvious in retrospect and felt like a gamble in the moment. The obvious response to a distress call was approach. The obvious response to an encirclement was retreat. The perpendicular course was neither, and neither obvious response was operationally acceptable. Approach entered the trap. Retreat abandoned a maritime law obligation and conceded the initiative. The perpendicular course did something more subtle. It changed the problem the IRGCN was solving. The staging geometry had been built around a destroyer that would do one of 2 predictable things. The third option, the lateral movement that neither approached the dhow nor retreated from the strait, required the fast attack craft to recalculate, recoordinate, and decide in real time whether to pursue a target that was no longer behaving as the plan anticipated. real-time recalculation under time pressure introduced errors. Errors created gaps. Gaps were where the operation's geometry fell apart. The flankers slowing at 4:58 a.m. was the visible result of that recalculation. Their intercept solutions, built around the destroyer's original course along the shipping lane, no longer produced valid closure geometries against a target moving perpendicular to their approach. Vectors. Recomputing the solution at 22 knots in confined waters with a helicopter overhead, documenting everything, took time that the operation's timing had not budgeted. The lead blocking pair had held their course longer because their role was simpler: block the approach lane, regardless of the target's heading. But the LRAD at 4:59 a.m. resolved that problem by making the blocking position untenable for small vessel crews operating in open or lightly sheltered positions. The operation had 3 failure points. The Seahawk exposing the dhow's running engine was the first. The perpendicular course disrupting the flanker geometry was the second. The LRAD separating the blocking pair was the third. Any one of those 3 alone might not have been sufficient. All 3, applied in sequence over 8 minutes, dissolved a staging operation that had been months in the planning. He had been 23 years old for 11 days. He would be 23 years old for 11 more months. He had just held course through the Hormuz Strait, while an IRGCN staging operation deployed a disabled dhow and 4 fast attack craft around a distress call at 4:47 a.m. in the dark. He went below at 5:30 a.m. when his watch ended. He did not think about the dhow or the fast attack craft or the LRAD or the Seahawk's laser marker on the wheelhouse. He thought about the course. The course had been perpendicular to the lane. The course had held. The Hormuz Strait carried its traffic. The inbound lane was clear. 18 commercial vessels transited the area between 4:47 a.m. and 7 a.m., none of them aware that the lane had been the site of an IRGCN staging operation that had been assessed, countered, and resolved in 16 minutes. The assumption that the lane would be clear tomorrow was not free. It was maintained by the warship that had been here last night and would be here again tonight. The dhow's departure at 5:01 a.m. was the most operationally revealing moment of the entire engagement, though it would not appear in any publicly released account. A genuinely disabled vessel whose engine had miraculously recovered would contact the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, update its status, and report its new course. The dhow did none of those things. It simply began moving northeast at 12 knots, away from the Seahawk's searchlight and laser marker, without any radio communication before, during, or after the recovery. The silence of the departure matched the silence of the distress calls, later repetitions. The operation had been designed to use Channel 16 as a trigger mechanism, not as a genuine communication channel. Once the trigger had been pulled and the response had not produced the expected geometry, the radio had no further operational purpose. The Seahawk crew documented the departure from 200 feet. Hull number, course, speed, thermal signature of the engine space throughout. The footage would go to the intelligence database. Naval intelligence analysts who had spent years building the IRGCN dhow operations file, would add it to the pattern analysis. Future captains transiting the strait would be briefed on this incident's specific details. The positioning, 11 nautical miles northwest of Qeshm, the pre-dawn timing window, the simultaneous four-boat launch, the perpendicular response, the thermal imaging confirmation of engine operation during distress broadcast. The institutional memory of the fleet was built one incident at a time. This one had been documented thoroughly. The cost of the 16 minutes appeared in the engineering log as fuel consumption at non-standard power settings during the course change and speed adjustments. It appeared in the maintenance log as Seahawk rotor hours added to the component life accounting. It appeared nowhere as an emotional record of what it was like to stand watch in the Hormuz Strait at 4:47 a.m. when a distress call came through the channel 16 and the radar showed a stopped vessel in the shipping lane, and nothing about the next 16 minutes was predictable. The crew who lived that 16 minutes would carry it in the specific, physical way that people carry things they cannot file in any official log. The watch officer who had called the captain at 4:49 a.m., the electronic warfare monitor who had flagged the simultaneous four-boat emergence at 4:52 a.m., the Seahawk pilot who had descended to 200 feet over a vessel that might or might not have been what it claimed to be, in the dark, in the Hormuz Strait at 4:57 a.m. They had done their jobs. The lane had stayed open. That was a log entry. Everything else was theirs to keep. One stage distress contact. 4 IRGCN fast attack craft. At 16 minutes from distress call to full disengagement. Closest approach to lead blocking pair. 1,900 yards. Distress call deviation from course. 0. The Hormuz Strait does not reward hesitation. It rewards the commander who has already made the decision before the radio carries the first transmission. The dhow was stopped. The destroyer was not.